Hi everyone, thank you all for coming. I know you're busy, so I'm really happy that you made some time to come here and listen to my talk. So today I'm going to talk to you about something called moral injury. It's a new concept I was introduced to in my studies, and it's kind of similar to something that you all familiar with. So I remember when I started my work at UNHCR, there was a lot of conversation about burnout, and I took that sort of memories with me as I was studying my master's, and I came across a discovery, and today I'm going to talk to you about that discovery that I came across. So I'm going to begin the talk by asking you a few questions, and I want you to raise your hands basically if you agree with the question. So my first question is, have you, by the end of a workday, ever felt drained, as if you don't have energy or any physical energy or emotions left in you after a long day of working in UNHCR? So raise if your hand if that answer is yes. No? Never, yeah? Okay, so most of you did. Some of you didn't. I'm actually surprised. Raise your hand if you ever had a negative thought about your job. Okay. It's recording on me, not on you guys, so it's okay. Well, I certainly remember having some negative thoughts about my job. Have you ever felt that you don't have the time to do your job, focus on the quality of the job in your work? Okay, so most of you did. So these questions basically are the main symptoms of what we call burnout. So a lot of you came across the term burnout, but for those of you who are not familiar with, I'm going to explain it as we go in my talk. But essentially, these three statements reflect three main symptoms for burnout, which are that feeling of emotional exhaustion, that feeling of detachment from the job, and that feeling of lack of accomplishment. So chances if you raise your hand on the three questions, you probably experienced burnout. Okay, so what is burnout? So burnout actually is a term that came in the 70s, around the time where the US was engaged in something called the war on drugs, if you ever came across this kind of story. So back then, President Richard Nixon started basically putting everyone who uses drugs in jail. There was an opposition group of people who essentially they wanted to treat people, rather than putting them in prison, they wanted to treat people who use drugs in a humane way. So this one of the people working in one of the clinics that were helping drug addicts, his name was Friedenberg. He had a team of nurses and himself, and they were working with people who were using drugs, and he noticed over time that these people started losing that motivation to work with people. They started becoming more exhausted. They weren't motivated to do the job as they used to at the beginning. So, borrowing some language from his patients who were drug addicts themselves, he coined the term burnout, because drug addicts, they would refer to each other sometimes when they use a lot of drugs as that person, he just burnt out, he doesn't have any energy, she doesn't have any energy. So he took that. So the term actually comes from that experience of people treating drug addicts, and drug addicts came out with the term. So just a bit of history. Now, the experience of burnout it's a real one, right? I'm not going to argue today with you that it's not just something that we talk about or write about. It's a real experience. Judging by how many of you raise their hands, most of you have experienced burnout. And also the other thing is, it's not just a psychological experience that people write about in papers. It's something that was endorsed by the World Health Organization. So in 2019, the World Health Organization issued a statement saying that burnout is a real occupational phenomenon that happened among people who work. It's the feelings that I was talking about. The three feelings, which is feeling emotionally exhausted, detached, and feeling like you're not achieving as much as you should. these feelings, the WHO said like, these happens to people who work. So it's a real experience. But when it comes to mental health in general, it's not something that you can touch. When we say depression, when we say anxiety, when we say burnout, these things are just but a story that we tell ourselves. Just like how money exists, does not have a real value in the sense that we give the value to it. When we use words like burnout and depression, anxiety, these are stories that we tell ourselves to help us understand our emotions and feelings. So, in that sense, burnout is a story. It is a story that we all are familiar with. It's a story that the WHO said it exists, it's real. But what I'm going to talk to you about, that burnout is a story that is unfinished. And this is my basically the point that I want to give to you today is that when you experience burnout, there's something that happens after that. When I was working in UNHCR, and I think many people do not pay attention to a lot. And today I'm going to try to show you, and make you focus on the things that happen after burnout. This is how the story continues. Just be not just at the experience of feeling exhausted and not achieving much. So how I'm going to do this, I'm going to go through with you to the story of how do you experience burnout working, let's say, in a context of refugee status determination from the beginning. So we all know that feeling. It's the beginning of of a month, and you're given a lot of cases. You already have some few cases from before, and you're told you have to. The goal will increase every month, and it's just so much to do. You have a lot of work. It's just like it's never ending, and you feel like this kind of weight. This it's like and that feeling. It's something that we're all connected. So this, you get that work. You have a lot of work to do, and suddenly that weight comes and changes, and you start pushing yourself away from that, from the work itself. You say, well, you're giving me so much work, I can't do this, but they only care about numbers. This is just if they really care about something else, you should do something different. So in a way, you're sort of you're being cynical about your place in the organization. And then, because of this weight, because of you're pushing yourself away, you're not feeling like you're being heard. You're not doing the work as you should. So you're also getting that you're not accomplishing what you feel like you should be accomplishing, and that leaves you with this idea, with this feeling that you're doing a lot of work, but you're not feeling like you're being appreciated. And actually, in one of I think it's the only study that UNHCR did about mental health with this worker, with this kind of staff, and it shows that they surveyed about 2,500 staff members in UNHCR, and about more than 70% actually, 72% of UNHCR staff felt that their efforts are not being appreciated, which is again, it's a sign of, I think it's a sign of burnout. But what I'm going to talk to you about is that, so basically this, and after all of these experiences happen, we just feel like we're running, we're tired, we're just like pushing every month, it's just like energy, like we're running on reserve. And this is sort of the experience of burnout, it's just like, I'm barely pushing myself. So we go and we say, I feel burnt out, sometimes it just stays with us. Sometimes we tell our colleagues, sometimes we take it more seriously, but generally it ends there. I have a lot of work, and I this is what I feel, and sometimes I do something about it, sometimes not. What I wanted to kind of, point out is that, when we feel tired, when we feel like we can't do our job, when we feel we can't push any longer, it is very likely that our eyes might start slipping some detail. We might make a tiny error here, a tiny error there. We might not make, we have a lot of workload, but we can't, do our basically 100% effort, with every case that we can. Sometimes we will make errors and mistakes. And these errors and mistakes, sometimes they're very tiny. Sometimes they're caught in the review stage, they come back. Sometimes they are big, and especially not only that the experience of burnout, feeling tired, happens and it leads us to do some mistakes, but also sometimes that these are people's lives. Like, we do this work not only to for the sake of work, but that our work revolves around people's lives. What we do end up changing people's lives, and sometimes if we don't do our best and we make a mistake, that steers us into making a wrong decision that could change people's lives. Now, when we think about burnout, we don't consider what happens after burnout, which is the mistakes, and we don't consider context. But if we do consider mistakes in context, we can start reflecting on our experiences and think back when we feel tired, when we feel fatigued, when we don't have the energy to do anything anymore, when mistakes or errors start happening, and they happen in a context where there's high stake life and death decision. Sometimes some thoughts just they linger, they stay. You have something circles around, probably, it's just a tiny thing, small thing. Is it really, the day comes, next day, and it bugs you, you don't know if especially because, the context of UNHCR, it's that the right decision might not necessarily be clear all the time. It's not like you can make a very 100% sure decision every time about what you do. So there's always this ambiguity could lead you to start just worrying and reminiscing. And that thought and worries can also bring some difficult emotions, like a thought like, I did something bad, could turn easily into an emotion of like this guilt. And it might not be necessarily like a strong guilt at the beginning, but you get it, and then later on, things grow if they're left unaddressed, Suddenly, like, I did something bad, I am a bad person, and of course, because these feelings, feelings of guilt and shame are very hard to share with other people. And what you don't share grow. So it's likely that a lot of these experiences are just kind of we internalize them. We hold them really inside us and we don't talk about them. Or it might not be you who did the mistake. It might be that you feel that this amount of work that you were given, it just it was unfair. It wasn't your fault that you did this mistake. It wasn't your fault you didn't, analyze this case to the best of your potential. It was the case of, you were being pushed to do a lot of work, and you can't say no, and you have to have a job. So you feel like that the person or the organization in general is pushing you into doing something you don't want. So there's an experience of betrayal. You don't feel like I don't trust either the people around me or the people above me, and that experience is also something we don't like to talk about, and it grows. Now, these emotions, which are shame, guilt, and betrayal, these are together what's it called a moral injury. So moral injury is the experience that happens when you do something or fail to do something that violates a core belief that is held dear by you. And that's something personal to every person. So, but essentially, it's about emotions and feelings of shame, guilt, and betrayal, which we don't like to talk about. Now, I came across moral injury when I was doing, as you know, I was doing my master's last year. And moral injury comes as a concept from the military. So, I was doing my master's, doing my research at King's, and I was reading a lot about this concept, and most of the research exists about soldiers basically who went to Vietnam War and then later to Iraq War, and they went, and many of them they came back. They didn't have a lot of problems in the war, so they did not experience anything traumatic firsthand, but they came feeling troubled, and at first they didn't understand what was happening with them, but they started talking to them, and they realized that a lot of them feel this sort of sense of betrayal by either they feel like they betrayed themselves, so they were in the battle, they thought they were shooting like a soldier, but they shot a civilian, so they feel like they did something really wrong, or they were, for example, in a situation where they felt like they should have done something, like they saw someone maltreating someone or mistreating them, and they couldn't say anything, and they took it to the heart, or they felt betrayal. They felt like they were going as freedom fighters, but then later they came and after the conflict realized that I wasn't being sent to free people, I was being sent to serve a political reason, and that left him with this kind of very immense, intense experience of like shame, guilt, or betrayal that I was talking about, which is moral injury. So when I started understanding moral injury, and I started reflecting about my time at UNHCR, I started thinking, what if, that experience that is common to a soldier in battle, what if it could be experienced by a social worker? Because in many ways, as social workers, what we go through is in a way very similar to what a soldier goes through. Like we interact hand to hand with people who were exposed to conflict. We work under a lot of pressure sometimes. We make decisions that could steer people's lives and change them. And in many ways, that is an experience a soldier. Most soldiers do not fight in battle. Actually, most soldiers, just stay in camps and basically serve administrative things. So there's a lot of commonality between what a social worker experiences and a soldier. So I thought I wanted to do research to examine this experience, and in particular, I reflected on my time when I started back at UNHCR. I remember when I started, there was this massive, cut in funding in UNHCR. Like when I began, and when I arrived, I didn't understand. Like, my first day was extremely tense. The office, everyone was just like, and I started hearing the stories. People were saying, the feeling that. UNHCR shouldn't have done this. They shouldn't have cut funding on so many people and had to kind of end their contracts. And that to me felt like an experience of betrayal that a lot of people have felt when working with UNHCR. And then I also remember that a lot of people were talking about this experience of burnout. So I was like, well, what if this feeling of burnout is actually a sign that people are trying to say, they feel betrayal or shame or guilt, but they don't have necessarily the words, because burnout is common and known, but not necessarily moral injury. So before I begin talking about my research, I just wanted to ask if anyone has any question before is anything unclear to anyone? Is it?
Questions later?
We can ask questions later, but if there is anything burning or nothing connecting well with someone.
No, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Perfect.
This is Manar.
Hi, Manar. So.
Hey, thank you. It's a very interesting presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted to research moral injury. And my initial idea was to go around and interview people, just talk to them and see if in their day-to-day work they go on and experience these symptoms that I was talking about. So I contacted King's College. I started contacting different humanitarian organizations, including the UN, and also some universities in Jordan. And the process took me about 6 months, essentially, of just trying to get approvals. And what I realized in this process, eventually I couldn't do the research that I initially wanted, but I think the experience made me realize how much these emotions of shame, guilt, and betrayal, we just don't want to talk about it. Even at an organization level, I had a lot of pushback just because, and I think I agree with you know, the people who told me not to do it. Because, you know, if you think about it as a researcher, if you ask someone about, you know, the things that they regret, their experience of shame and guilt, you never know what they might tell you. You know, you're essentially telling them, you know, open the secret box, and that could put me in danger. And anyways, without making the story too long, I ended up changing my research process, and I decided to look at instead of doing research that is you know, collecting interviews from people, I decided to do secondary research. So reading the literature, just looking at work that was already done and analyzing it. And through that, I could bypass the ethical procedure, which to me was a challenge. So the challenge that I had, I needed basically a population that was regularly researched. So when I wanted to do research on social workers, there wasn't simply enough research on social workers to review and look for signs of burnout and moral injury. So what I did instead, I focused on nurses, because there's a lot of research on nurses, and particularly when they do mistakes. Because remember, my argument is that you experience burnout, that burnout leads to you to do mistakes, and these mistakes, when you feel that they violate your core belief, you start feeling guilty and ashamed from. So mistakes is an essential thing. So nurses, or the literature on nurses, offered a unique opportunity, because in the nursing world, there's can I ask you to take the phone outside? Sorry, can I ask you to take the phone outside? Yeah. So when I started, so I zoomed in on the literature on nurses, which offered a unique opportunity to study mistakes, and there was a lot of research. And what I did, I looked at all the research out there that shows that basically interview nurses when they do mistakes. So I didn't look at research that looked specifically at burnout and started to think about, well, when they do research on burnout, these nurses, do they also talk about moral injury? I didn't do that. I just looked at the research that just generally sits with a nurse and asks her, how do you feel when you do a mistake? And that is better, because just like if you can reflect on, for example, doing an interview, when you ask a close-ended question, that's not a good thing, because it does not give you all the information. You might miss something that you're not aware of. So same thing with research. You don't want to get research that is too focused. You want research that is very open, so you don't get results just because you wanted them to. You want the results to be as least biased as possible.
Can I add something here, Hussein?
Yeah, of course.
I like the field that you collect the information or research about. It is nursing and specific during COVID situation.
Yeah.
And what came to my mind, it's the amount of work that nurses or social workers they were asked to do, and they were like swamped with all these cases of people they are facing that. And when I want to compare it to like a situation like when there are large influx of, for example, those who were at the border during the Syrian operation. I mean, they were like inside the very, very difficult situation. They were like fearful for their life, and sometimes they were not able to finish the needed work. I mean, this feeling of guilt or shame during this period of time, COVID, for example, with nursing, I can correlate it with the feeling of us not being able to, for example, at the beginning of the Syrian operation, believe me, I used to work, because at the beginning we used to do RSD for Syrian cases, remembering, and then I used to stay until 2 and 3, and sometimes I was asked by my family members, please go to sleep because there is no time for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amount
And I think
of work.
COVID have showed how much put a lot of pressure on a lot of people, and in a way, there's a lot of research when it comes to nurses and them working during COVID time.
I mean, not being able to accomplish all your duties.
Yeah.
So in the COVID-19 with nursing, or in our situation, humanitarian, there is a large influx of refugees and the search of the operation. It's in a way like I can see how it can cause us this feeling of guilt in a way.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then I'll ask you later.
Yeah, well, I think this is an important point, and I want to open the discussion more about the experience of working during COVID, so we're going to come back to that at the end, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. So to just showcase the results, I didn't want to show numbers and stuff, but essentially, what I wanted to tell you, the main results of my work, I ended up looking at 12 studies that looked at just generally did the qualitative research, interviewing nurses about the experience that they have after doing medical errors. And in every study that I did, there was the symptoms of burnout and moral injury. They were talked about together. So nurses would talk about feeling emotionally exhausted. They don't feel like they're doing the job in the right way. And then they would also talk about feeling guilty, shamed, and sometimes betrayed by their colleagues. And so that happened in every study that I researched. So it's very, very common to have experience of burnout and moral injury. And when I was doing this research, I found another study that was published in the Lancet. So the Lancet is a very prestigious academic journal, and the study that was published there a few months ago, they confirms my results. So they also show that burnout and moral injury overlap, and actually they say that it could be the same thing, just by the way. So at first I thought, when I did the research, I thought well, burnout, my suspicion was that burnout happens, and then later on moral injury comes. But then when I did the research, I sort of like backed out from that hypothesis. My thinking right now is probably can happen from either direction. So these emotions of burnout, you might when you get these like overload of work, you feel exhausted emotionally, you start detaching yourself from the job, you get cynicism, and that could lead to feeling of betrayal. That the people working with you are not really having your best interest at heart, and that could make you feel guilty for doing your job or working in any way, whatever you're doing. But I also think it could happen the other way around. So you might do a mistake at work, start feeling guilty. That could feel, you might feel some sort of betrayal that somebody did something that pushed you to do that mistake, and that might also push you from disconnect you from doing your job, and that could lead to an emotional exhaustion. So the idea is that the experience of being burned out and the experience of moral injury could happen either after another, or one could lead the other, or the other could lead the other one. So now, I think what the research that I did is very new. So still, we don't know much about moral injury. We don't know how to treat it. We don't know the right approach to dealing with it. But essentially, it's not something that will be the same for everyone, because moral injury is about your personal beliefs, what you hold dear to yourself. It's not about. It's not like burnout. Burnout, it's an experience that everyone more or less, if they were given a lot of workload, they could have. Moral injury is about what you hold personal to you. So to someone it could be they believe in fairness. So the mistake or the error they do, it wouldn't matter unless it touched something that has to do with fairness. They might feel like they're not being fair. That could really get into them. To another person, it might be kindness. To another person, it could be how much well I'm doing my job. So it is different to everyone, and there's no right way there's no, like, let's say, a standard way of approaching moral injury. What I wanted to kind of try to point out to you today is that, you know, everyone in the team needs to start being sensitive to other people in the team and to understand not only who they are, but also what they believe in. Because in order to talk to each other in the right way and support each other in the right way, you need to listen, not just to what people, you know, might say when you start the conversation, but to really get deep and understand what your colleague might believe in, because that will drive their performance. And to supervisors also, that they need to, and to peers, you need to create the safe environment for people to come and to share these very personal beliefs. Why is that? Because when it comes to having a lot of work, it might not be possible every time, you know, to reduce the amount of work that you have. You know, you work usually in emergency kind of situations. Sometimes, you know, if you're feeling like you're burnt out, it might not be possible to just do less work. You still need to push yourself, and that could lead to more burnout. What I highlighted today, and what I wanted to show to you today, is that you can still push yourself more and perform better by not paying attention to the work, but paying attention to your beliefs and what's driving you. If you can align your belief with your work, if you can find ways that you can talk to people who you respect and or people who have, let's say, authority in some way or another over your work, and find ways to trusting them and connecting with them, that could help you with your performance, with that feeling of like, I don't have energy, I can't push myself more than I can right now. So hopefully this talk have given you the way to look at each other's conversations differently, and hopefully that awareness that burnout is linked or related to the experience of our morality will lead to change in behavior. You know, sometimes like your colleague or your manager talks to you and the conversation is focused about work, and you say, oh, I feel overwhelmed, I can't do this. To go even deeper, to say, well, hey, what is it about it? You know, what happened? You know, what do you feel is not really you're not being yourself in this job? What sort of like thing that you want to do more of that will make you feel fulfilled? So, and just to understand each other, that, you know, we all are different. We all have different beliefs. So just because one person has certain priorities, it doesn't mean that the other person doesn't. That doesn't mean that the other person share your beliefs. So that's it for me. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, go John.
I want to go back to the point where when you were talking about how we talk to each other about this, and kind of wonder how much can we actually spread this kind of spirit? Because sometimes you may have a problem, like I'm not going to generalize this, I'm going to speak about like very specific scenarios, like someone experiencing something that is not okay, but it's kind of in their head, like I'm fine, I'm functioning,
Yeah.
and they're not conscious about this. And the minute they start addressing or seeing this, it's probably noticed by others.
Mm.
Any false part, because you suddenly become very conscious to something that was this big,
Yeah.
and you kind of like you didn't intentionally deny it. You were just thinking that it's fine. And then you fell apart. And people, when they go to therapy or like they start speaking about things, they stop seeing anything apart from this.
Yeah.
Even therapy, it can like not be like a very good idea.
Yeah.
It gets too intense, and you are regarded by others like, are you okay? And this kind of, like this kind of vibe
Yeah, so-
behind people being too kind
Yeah.
to you, that you start wondering, I'm not kind of like average strong.
Yeah.
Like people be like extra cautious with you. It may actually cause you to feel that vulnerable again.
Mm.
I'm not sure. I'm made with
No, I think I understand what you're saying. So basically, you're saying,
It's out of love.
yeah. What if you, yeah,
It's
Sorry,
kind of-
can you just repeat the question
Yeah.
for the listener? For the
Yeah, yeah.
people on team?
So I think what you're saying, Jahan, in a way, like by putting some light onto something that we want to hide, maybe we make the problem bigger, and that might not be a good thing.
Or like it's
Yeah.
this close, so it's everything you see. You don't see anything else.
May I add here?
Yeah.
I can agree with Jihan that we are neglecting our feelings and our thoughts, and then we
And then-
face it,
Yeah.
and we are like into this well of, we cannot pull ourselves back from that, and we don't, because we have other responsibilities.
Okay. So what if we have neglected something for too long, and then when we pay attention to it, it just becomes unbearable? That's sort of the question. How do we approach this and deal with this? Is that the
And
question?
you would think to yourself, and before I recognize like this amount
Yeah.
of burnout or this amount of like being like emotionally heavy and exhausted, I was just doing fine.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And if you know, if I understood, you mean realizing that you're heading towards the breakdown before you actually reach that point.
Yeah,
That's
and
what you're
when you
saying?
reach it, you just stop seeing anything else.
Accept it.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
start like kind of getting treatment and things. But what about like this average people? You look at others and you see like they're managing, they have tough times and they have like a regular life after that. You see?
Okay. So I think that's also
It's like
that's
it's
another.
so- You either go all the way down or you're like in this butterfly world. You just want this equilibrium, just like everyone else.
Yeah, I like
Because you would think, look at this 1,000 people,
Yeah.
every one of them like has their own struggles, but they're functioning, they're okay.
Yeah.
And why can't I like be like not like the others, but
Yeah.
like I used to be,
Yeah.
at least, very least.
Okay, so there's sort of like two questions, or maybe three. The other part is like, what if when after telling other people, there's, they might not understand me, or might they change also their behavior towards me, and I don't want that. I want just them to be,
Which is amazing, but
Yeah.
it makes you feel a little bit more vulnerable.
yeah. Okay, so let me first answer the first question. It's like what happens to the worry that if I pay attention to something that I neglected for too long, that could be a problem rather than a solution. So let me first ask you, like, when it comes to our feelings and thoughts, has it ever worked to ignore something? It doesn't usually, right? So, and just like how, when we experience pain, when we ignore pain, what happens to pain?
It is worse.
Decreases, right? So this is how our emotions, and this is why by the way, burnout and moral injury are not mental illnesses. They're not a problem. They're just a sign. Like, you can't say pain is a problem. It's good to have pain, in that sense. And they just our body's way of making us pay attention to what we're doing. But the problem is that when we pay attention to pain, it's annoying. It's discomforting. So all I have to say about this is that this is the way of healing. you have to take the medicine, and the medicine is it tastes bitter, right? So although neglecting something is good for the short term, the long term, that it's just going to be harder and harder. Now, and this is the other thing about talking to other people, and this is I understand when I was doing this talk and thinking about moral injury, I started it's a very personal thing. Like I'm not suggesting here that you all sit together if you want, of course, but if to come and talk about your personal feelings, and to everyone, not everyone will understand where you're coming from. It's a very personal thing. You need to find the people you trust, the people who you can talk to without feeling like you're being judged. And that could be one person, could be two people, could be your colleague, it could be someone you're training, it could be someone that is supervising you. But you need to be careful as well. Not everyone will understand where you're coming from. And in a way, the way to treating or to addressing your moral injury is by finding people you trust and talk to. But if you find a person that judges you, then your feelings will become worse. You're gonna feel guilt, more shame. You're gonna feel more betrayal, and so you're gonna, be worse. But this is a responsibility to everyone. If the chances are, you all work in the same environment. This is all a challenge. So it's kind of like putting effort to try to be less judgmental, to have that safe environment, to create a situation where if I tell someone something to you, I'm not going to tell it to another person. That takes time to grow, but I don't think that it should be like I feel something, I'm going to share it with everyone. There's an element of take it step by step, and I think is there another question, or do you feel like I answered?
No, and just like what you said, it's like you're kind of surrounding yourself by these thoughts that in an atmosphere where everyone is kind of burnt out, you kind of pick it up from people. Even if you're not that tired, like from your work or from your responsibility, you would start getting used to it and kind of adopting it, like unconsciously.
Can you repeat that question?
Let's say you're in this place where most of the, let's say, employees are kind of been serving for too long, or like they haven't been on leave, or like in any other form of well-being for so long, and they start kind of like not intentionally like spreading this, but I mean that's what there is.
Spreading what?
Like, kind of
The
like
negative
spreading
things.
this.
Okay.
And then people will start kind of adopting this, even if they're not as burnt out. Like, how can you kind of protect yourself from like picking up others' feelings and kind of applying them to yourself? I don't know.
Neglecting,
It happens to me. Like, if you put me in a context, I kind of pick up the vibe.
There's a comment here.
Sorry.
Please.
I do think it's normal to feel affected by those around you. But I do think that it is also, we have several responsibilities in several directions in what you said. Well-being should not just be the responsibility of the organization. This is 99% of what this presentation is actually saying. Your well-being starts with you, and here he's saying the shift in perspective can assist you, and in doing so, you are improving the environment around you. Now, there's also something that I consider, especially with managers, where you have a lot of all of us have this. I'm just saying that managers to a slightly higher degree, is that we really influence those around us, like you say. But we should also try to serve as a bit of a filter, so that we don't spread that, that negativity, and so it doesn't become a monster, as you say. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Please.
Thank you, Dina. Actually, we were talking about this today.
Yes, we were actually exactly what I was thinking when you were going through the
We talked
presentation.
about like an hour before the session.
Okay.
Yeah, Jihan, first of all, I have two comments on what you said. Nobody is doing well. don't be don't be fooled by anybody's exterior that everything is perfect, everything is going great. Everybody suffers in their own way, maybe not in the same way you do, but they have their own problems. So my first suggestion to you is don't think that, oh, they're doing fine. I am the one who's not doing fine. Nobody is doing 100% fine. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing, and it's not about you, but generally speaking, I feel, and it's not only about work.
Yeah.
We need to reach with practice a certain level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
To know that no matter how unfair other people are to us, there's an element of our own contribution. So you spoke, and I totally agree with you, about supporting others, blah, blah. But I think if we focus too much on that, it will slowly become a seed in the head or in the mind that it is other people's responsibility to make me feel better. When it's only 1%.
Yeah.
People, and this is exactly what I was telling Dina today, people will keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
We are different personalities, characters, you just cannot click with some people.
Yeah.
No matter how nice you try to be.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you should not only focus on people making you feel better, because some people will just not make you feel better, and if you keep waiting for it, you will never have it.
Yeah.
So there's a big part of this, and I'm telling you, I'm not saying that this is very easy. It is a very difficult journey, but I went through it recently. It is about reframing. It's about shifting your perspective and acknowledging that you play a part in your own suffering, no matter what it is. Making sure that if it's about a job, you're doing it for a specific motivation, even if the motivation is just money. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's a justified motivation.
Yeah.
And then make your decisions accordingly. And of course, people need to do their part as well, but let's not put all the weight on other people making us feel better.
Yeah.
This is just my...
No, so to kind of wrap this together as well, to connect with the online audience, generally what we're talking about is kind of where other people fit into this. And as just to kind of reiterate, when I was giving this presentation, I didn't say someone like the organization is doing the wrong thing, or the person is doing the wrong thing, or the organization is doing the right thing, or the person is doing the wrong thing. And that was intentional. And when I said when we talk about mistakes, it's the things that you believe that are wrong, not necessarily that they are wrong themselves. And that's an important thing to focus on, because as you said, Dream, every relationship is bi-directional. You're not just like a receiver, but also you interact and you contribute back. And the same thing, not only with your relationship to another person, whether it's your peer or your supervisor, but also to the organization. You are the organization. You're part of it. And that could be another discussion to how you sort of like maintain your well-being and just ensure that you don't feel down. What I wanted to kind of point out today in this talk is that your belief is important. And when you talk to each other and discuss your work, it's easy to forget and ignore what's driving you, what you believe in to be important. My focus today was strictly about your work more than the difficulties that you have outside of work. That could be a whole science rather than so. So with that, I think we're running out of time. Please, Dalal.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, this feeling of guilt. Sometimes you hinted on that. It is positive, because otherwise, if we don't feel that we are guilty, we don't have this rush to, because how our work is. We need to accomplish a lot of and to keep us focused for the purpose of our work and the people of concern. So this feeling of guilt, although we consider it as emotional injury, it is healthy for us.
Yeah. These all of our emotions are important and healthy. Thank you for pointing this out. And that's why when I was talking, they're not a mental illness in the sense they're not a problem, but it's just when we leave them, when we ignore them for too long, they just start interfering with our work. That's I think thank you for pointing this out. This is one of the key messages I want to leave you with. Like something that bugs you, that emotions that you feel like you're not doing the right thing. If you leave it unaddressed, if you don't go and talk to another person about it, the people you trust. So very important that you ensure that that person is trustworthy, that you can talk to, because it could make it worse. But if you
Last point.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll go to this indifference, and this is dangerous.
Yeah.
And for me, to feel guilty is better than to feel indifference, and it happens.
Exactly, yeah. You feel disconnected from the work, feeling tired, and it's not nice to just not feeling when you don't feel fulfilled in your job, when you feel like it's not worth it. So yeah, that's. So thank you for listening.
I wonder if someone has any question, the audience.
Oh yeah. Anyone online? Is there any?
They can write and speak.
Who's online?
Tell them you can speak or write.
You can speak or write if you have any questions. While you're writing, I just want to say that just to give thank yous for my professor who supervised me on my research, moral injury and burnout. He's Professor Edgar Jones, very nice person, and without him I couldn't have done this research. And also the British government for basically sponsoring my master's. Thank you, Britain. And King's College London, of course. Yeah. Is there any question?
The online people are very quiet.
Oh,
They're reflective.
that could be very reflective. And I'll share the presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to.